Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. This is the second lecture for week 4, uh, dealing with worldviews in a pluralistic society. And we're going to continue where we left off from our last lecture. So please refer back to that if you haven't already watched it. Let me share the screen with you and we'll get started. This is where we left off last time. We did that exercise of, I told you to make some of these dots, and then using dots to make some kind of figure. And and we found out that most everybody doesn't do this, and that's because we're taught to connect dots. And we talked about the fact what it means to us. Let's go back for a second to this diagram we saw last time. And we talked about the fact the cultural experiences and then the cognitive, affective, evaluative aspects of taking these experiences, and out of that we develop our worldview. So we're going to move into the idea of worldview and go through some different worldviews, and we'll get to understand what we're talking about when we talk about worldviews. We gave a definition of worldviews already, and use the iceberg illustration to talk about worldviews. Now we're going to go into individual worldviews in this next section, and we'll cover about 15 or 16 slides, somewhere in there, and that'll be the second one, and then we'll have one final one on this subject matter. So going back here, do remember, that in this mix is God's revelation of himself in Christ and the Bible and so forth that enters into this to help us with our worldview, which is built into us to have a sense of something beyond us. So let's move on then to where we left off. So when we get down to talking more about worldviews, there's some questions we can ask to help us understand what our worldview is. And of course, your capstone paper in this course will have a lot to do with you articulating your particular worldview. So what we talk about here during all of this will help you in articulating that within your particular cultural background, which for the most part will be those of us from the US. So first question, what is prime reality? What's really real? What's really real? And of course, for Christians, it's the spiritual and the physical world we live in, both created by God. What is the nature of the external reality? That is the world around us. Is it really real, or is it a construct of our mind? Some worldviews and religions don't believe that the world around us is really real. It's a construct from within our minds, and so their word for it, Maya, illusion, and it's quite different from us in the U.S., where we believe the world around us is really real, and God created a real physical realm and developed, and we all have spiritual natures. So that comes to what is a human being then in the midst of that. And so a worldview explains what a human being is from that worldview. For example, for Christians, a human being is a person created in the image of God. All people are created in the image of God, therefore of equal value in God's sight. Now, if you are, on the other hand, you were a secularist and didn't believe in the spiritual side of things, you would say, well, we're just a bunch of molecules, electrons, protons, neutrons, that are just happen to accidentally bang together, eventually evolved into what a human being is, but there's no spiritual nature, it's just physical nature. That would be their description of a human being. But what happens to a person after death? Now, the worldview can answer that, but but some worldviews, they don't have an answer for that. Why is it possible to know anything at all? This has to do with knowledge. How do we know what we know? And we'll be talking more about that later. You know, various people question whether we can know anything for sure or not. How do we know what is right and wrong? Uh, how do we determine that? And based on your worldview, that's, that tells you how you come up with the answer for that. What is the meaning of human history? Various worldviews have different views of human history. Some are linear, like Christianity, and even secularism. There was a beginning and there will be an end. But some, it's cyclical or circular, and it just keeps going around forever. And that's different. We'll see some of those in the presentation here. All right, well, let's talk about worldview models. And this is how we'll talk about looking at different worldviews. I wrote a paper on this, and it was published in a peer-reviewed journal. And this is comes out of that research. But if you looking at worldviews, worldviews can have a spiritual realm dimension or not even. But all of them have a view of the physical realm, whether they believe it's really real or not. There is a realm in which we exist, and whether they believe the realm is physical or real or Maya, or in other words, use the English word illusion. And up here you have these lines, the relationships. There's relationships within the spiritual realm or not. Depending on the worldview. And then down here, the life cycle can be linear, or it could be circular, like in reincarnation and so forth. Now, over here, if you bring these realms together, you would have and overlap these lines here, these circles or ovals. You could have the spiritual realm overlapping with the physical realm, and you notice these lines, arrows going from the spiritual realm to the physical, from the physical to the spiritual. This means to show interaction. So this would be considered a high interaction between spiritual and physical realm. So some worldviews, there's a lot of interaction between the spiritual and physical realm, like in Christianity. God has communicated. He's even come down in the flesh as Christ. Very active interaction with the world, and he says he's interacting with the world in the Bible. On the other hand, you have some worldviews that they might believe in the spiritual realm and physical realm, but there's a low interaction between the two. There may be a distance. There may be some interaction between the two, or maybe it's just one way. And so that's different. So this will make up our different models as we go forward. So the first model here, let's see what worldview this might be. Notice you have the material world here, and it's linear. In other words, there was a beginning, there's an end in this material world, this worldview. And notice there's communication from the spiritual realm to the physical realm. And notice that this spiritual realm overlaps with the physical realm quite a bit, and that even this line is porous. So that means there's a lot of interaction. And you have up in the spiritual realm, you have the worldview would say there's God and the rest of the spiritual realm. So what worldview would that be? And of course, this is the Christian worldview. I put the cross in there to show, this is the ultimate interaction between the spiritual realm and the physical in Christianity, saying when Christ came, he was God who came in the flesh, as the Bible teaches. And it shows, it was the ultimate showing of who God is. If you want to know what God is like and how he interact with you as in person, that would be what Christ would give you the example of that. As Christ said, if you see me, you've seen the Father. And so a lot of interaction, and the Bible depicts God interacting throughout history with his creation, with people throughout times, prophets, the ancestral forefathers, to apostles and so forth, but the most personal is Christ. And through that, he's fulfilling a promise that salvation come to anyone through him. So that's Christian worldview. So if you summarize that, world created by a personal God, It's a purposeful creation. In other words, God created it in a specific way. God continues to interact with his creation. God acts and people can respond to that. And it's always been God acts first, and then he solicits a response, hopefully a positive response, that his creation will respond to him in a positive way. Although we know from biblical history, obviously, humanity rebelled sometimes, and then God acts and people respond. So people exist in a relationship with God, whether they believe it or not. That exists. And then linear material world to eternal existence is how we see it in Christian worldview. God, Christ, the I am, he is self-revealing and communicating. So there is a God, and he does communicate, makes himself known in various ways through the teachings and through the Bible, and even in nature, in the general revelation type of thing, that we can see things that work in orderly ways generally, and it's beautiful and depicts the possible existence of God. Incarnation ultimately is that ultimate interaction of the spiritual with the physical realm. So Christian worldview, we start with that one because we want to think about this as compared to other worldviews. The next lecture will finish off this series, these 3 sections on this presentation, in which we'll compare these worldviews that we're going to look at now. Okay, so here's another one. Now notice we got a real material world. Big Bang happens. It's linear. There was a beginning with the Big Bang, and there will be an end. What that will be, we don't know in this worldview. It's just the world will wind down. So in one way or another, or some catastrophe will happen, like get hit with a meteorite or something that will extinguish life as we know it. Notice that up here, there is no spiritual realm. It's a self-existing impersonal power that, somehow the Big Bang occurred and this created. It becomes, you probably recognize this one from science classes. And this is a secular worldview in the sense that, there is no spiritual dimension with this view. And so it's a closed worldview system as opposed to an open world view system. And so no relationship with the spiritual realm. So no personal source for existence of the world, accidental formation by explosion over time, basic elements combined, evolved, mutated to form the current world. Eventually it'll run down, and so it's a linear history. If it exists that long and some catastrophe doesn't wipe it out, which is what a lot of people think will happen. This is what Peter Berger, a sociologist and famous writer, called the world without windows. You'll hear me refer to that. So he wrote this, the reigning viewpoint of the academy, that's the general, university academy, is that the physical material universe is all that there is, was, or ever will be. The only real world is the world of the 5 senses. That's why we did that thing at the beginning on perception. We call this physicalism, philosophical naturalism, scientism, or secularism. And we'll generally use the term secularism. You'll see me mention scientism as well. In this kind of world, the ceiling is secured, the windows are shut, and the blinds have been pulled. We are stuck in a world without transcendence, mystery, and especially without God. And so he's depicting this secular worldview. There's no God, and certainly no spiritual dimension to the world or to humanity. And this is a challenging worldview that we see more of today in our culture. That's why part of what we'll be studying in this class is secularism and how it's developed, and how we can address it, because it's becoming one of the areas that we need to address more from a Christian worldview perspective. All right, here's another worldview. Now notice you got your material world here, it's really real, and it is also linear. It has a beginning, it'll have an end. You do have God, but he's very distant, and notice the arrows only move this way, and they don't overlap. And so this is a particular type of worldview. Some of our founding fathers, a minority by far of them held this view. The most held to some kind of traditional Christian worldview that we just saw earlier. This is what's called deistic worldview, and in this one they believe God exists and that He created everything and set up the natural laws by which our universe and world runs. That's why we can see that, it's orderly for the most part. And they say the only way that could be is if some intelligence created it. But once God did that, well, he had it all in place. He's not involved. He left some moral guidance, like they'll look at the Bible and say, well, there's some moral guidance in the Bible, and that is something we should look at and use as moral guidance in the world. But they wouldn't believe in the supernatural aspects of the Bible. So when you talk about deistic worldview, God did create the world and set it to run by natural law. But he does not intervene miraculously, but revealed some moral guidance, which they would say the Bible gives us some of that, but they wouldn't necessarily always say you have to accept it all. But for sure, they would throw out the miraculous part. For example, Thomas Jefferson, he created what was called the Jefferson Bible. Well, he took out all the miraculous aspects, which of course takes out Christ and him coming and dying and being resurrected, and kind of just takes out the whole essence of Christianity. But such is the deistic worldview. God is separate from the world. He's not interacting. And as I mentioned, some of the founding fathers held this view. It's a linear view of history. And so secular worldview, deistic worldview, they all have a linear. There was a beginning and there's going to be an end view of it. And the world is really real. But God's really uninvolved in this world. He's already set everything in motion, doesn't need to be involved. Well, here's a very complicated worldview. If you diagram it, here you see the physical world, which is really real, and there's a linear. There was a beginning, and God did create the world and set it to work, and there will be an end. But the spiritual realm is very big and highly involved in the physical realm. Mainly through diviners, sorcerers from the human side, and then ancestral spirits from the spiritual side, and even evil spirits and things like that. And notice that most of the interaction is between the physical realm and this ancestral spiritual aspect of the realm, back and forth, same over here. But there is interaction, but very little interaction from God directly. But humans have access to God generally through a prophet of some sort. But this is the place where my wife and I worked, the Meru peoples. This is their worldview. And for them, God does exist. He did create everything. And they do, traditionally, they offered sacrifices to him. And it was very similar to Old Testament type of things. And but for them, ancestral spirits interacted on a daily basis with the physical realm. So they very much feel like their people are both spiritual and physical. And when you die, you go to be in this with the ancestral spirits in the spiritual realm. God is there, but he's kind of separate. It kind of overlaps just a little bit with this realm. But he's a distant God, and they didn't have any scripture to tell them about God, but they had prophets that would tell them, how to be pleasing to God. And so that's their worldview. We would this is a similar one. They'd say Batutsi, Bahutu, Batwa. This was from Rwanda, and these tribes. This is where the genocide took place in Rwanda between these groups. who basically had a same worldview, but one was dominant, and then the genocide took place. Well, their worldview is exactly like the Meru, except that in the spiritual realm they had 3 levels for some reason, which I never was able to find out exactly why that it was the case, but very much the same otherwise. So when you summarize them, their worldview, the spiritual realm of ancestral spirits influences everyday life. God is obscure to humanity, but he is there, and he is the one that created everything. They often call him the creator God, among also the holy God, the all-powerful God, that kind of thing. At death, one joins these ancestral spirits, so it's a different view than Christian view, where you're in heaven in the presence of God. But they do have a linear history idea that there was a beginning, God created things, and there will be an end, but there's not much theology related to how that will happen. But God is distant here. He's not highly involved on everyday life. Only the ancestral spirits are. All right, here's another one. This one, you have, again, this physical realm, and again, it's linear. If there was a beginning, there'll be an end. Notice there are arrows between the spiritual realm and the physical, but right here you have submission. And this is kind of a giveaway if you know your world religions. But what humanity has to do is they have to submit to the spiritual realm, more specifically to this person, Allah. And this, of course, is the Islamic worldview. You can notice it's a lot like the Christian worldview in that you have the physical realm, the spiritual realm, and there is interaction between the two. We would agree with Muslims. God calls us to submit to him, but you'll notice there's these don't overlap. The spiritual realm doesn't overlap with the physical realm. And that's because God is so transcendent that he doesn't really interact personally with the spiritual realm. He does give you laws. He does tell you what you should do. And you got the Quran that was given by Angel Gabriel. And, the rules that you have to follow to be pleasing to God. And, and if you're not, you'll suffer the consequences of hell. There is no like in Christianity, that through Christ you have grace. We know we can't live perfectly to earn our salvation, but for Islam, it's more of doing right so you can earn Allah's favor, and you'll be in paradise. But there's no guarantee, like in Christianity, you live by faith, even though you don't always do what's right. You are promised eternal life. There is no ultimate promise. That's why you get things like suicide bombers and stuff like that. They, if you die in a jihad, and give your life, you're guaranteed paradise. And that is very foreign to us as Christians. But this is the Muslim worldview, and it's not all that different from the Christian in a lot of ways, but there are a number of differences. We'll look at those differences later in the next presentation. In this Islam, world was created by a sovereign, transcendent God, and there's very strong emphasis on the fact he's sovereign and transcendent, and you really can't, sway him. Where the Bible shows people interacting, leaders of the Jews interacting with God, and saying, "Well, God, wait on passing judgment on people for acting this way, and give them another chance." You don't see that in Islam, and it's that personal relationship with God comes out in Scripture, but not in Islam. God rewards and punishes. We, as Christians, we know that's true too. God demands submission and obedience. We know that is the case too for us as Christians. On the other hand, as we mentioned a second ago, God not influenced by his creation. We would say in biblical teaching that that's not the case. God does call attention to things and ask his creation to respond to it. And when they do, he's influenced by that creation. People exist in obedience to God, and that would be the same for Christianity. Linear material world to eternal existence. They believe that God created the world, and there will be a judgment day, and it's similar view as Christian. And that is most likely because Muhammad was influenced by Christianity that was around him at the time, and Judaism as well. So we shouldn't be surprised in that. Here's one that's very different from what we've been seeing. We've been saying there's a spiritual dimension and a physical, except in the case of secularism, when there's no spiritual. Here's one with really no spiritual either, but it's a world religion, and so in it you see the physical world here, and then you get these dotted lines, and it permeates the physical world, but also somewhat outside of the physical world. This is called Brahman, and this is a Hindu worldview. Notice there are these other circles. These are gods. If you were to, scholars, Hindu scholars would say there's something like 300 million gods. I don't know how they could count that, but that's their worldview. And you might notice that it's not linear, it's circular, what they call samsara, or we would say reincarnation. You got the individual soul, the Atman it's called, that when you physically die, your soul goes through the cycle of reincarnation. And based on your good works or karma, which translates duty, if you did your duty better than you didn't do it, you'll reincarnate at a higher level, depending on the type of religion, what that is. In Hinduism, there's certain caste systems, and you can go up in the caste system, or if you do poorly, go down. The material world in this view is not really real. They don't view the world, they call it Maya or illusion, we would translate that. The only thing that's really real is Brahman, this dimension here. And their scholars describe it, well, if you ever got released from your cycle of samsara, reincarnation, which is the ultimate goal of the holy men and women in Hinduism, is to be able to meditate and work their way out. It's a whole work system. And if you do, you get released from reincarnation, from that continuous unending cycle. And as they say, it'd be like you're a drop of water being dropped into the vast ocean, and you're just absorbed into Brahman, and you cease to exist as an individual. You're just part of that universal reality called Brahman. And that's quite a different worldview than a Christian worldview and even a secular worldview. So ultimately, gods are primarily powers of nature. Gods are not separate from the creation. They just view gods as on a higher area level of purity in a purity chart. And so if you're on the lower end, you have inanimate objects, but they're all part of a spectrum in this illusionary world. So transmigration of the soul through samsara, in other words, soul goes through, body dies, and the soul continues through the cycle according to your works. Brahman, the universal spirit, exists in the world, and that's ultimately where they would want to get absorbed once you get out of the cycle of reincarnation. Truth of the matter is, by their own teaching, it's very hard to get out of that cycle of reincarnation. Only the most spiritual ever achieve it. So history is cyclical, circular, life, death, reincarnation, new existence, and that's goes on forever. And multiple gods in the system. All right, here's another one similar to the one we just saw in Hinduism, but you notice this Brahman is missing here, and they the only thing that goes through this cycle of samsara, reincarnation, is karma. There's no individual soul even in this system. And if you ever could get released, and this would be, you have to do it on your own good works and meditation to get it. And in their own system of belief, they will say very few people ever do it. Only the holiest of the holy monks ever accomplish this. And the common people don't have any chance at all of accomplishing it. And so this is what's the original Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism. And again, only this world exists, but it's also illusion, Maya. And it's a world of suffering and going through this cycle of reincarnation. And to ever get out of this cycle of suffering, you would need to, get this release through your works. And then you just, nirvana, a lot of people have asked me when I'm doing presentations on world religion, is it nirvana just another term for heaven? And that is no. Nirvana just means it's a place of non-existence. You cease to exist. So the only thing that really exists in an illusionary form, of course, is by this worldview is the present world. But it's a mental construct. It's not really real. So that goes back to what we were saying earlier about knowledge and things in people's worldview. All right, so the world is only psychologically real. Only karma exists after death. Everything exists in a state of impermanence and change. There's really no death. You just cycle through this reincarnation. And there's nothing eternal within the person, like the soul or anything like that. So there's no transmigration of soul like there is in Hinduism. And Buddhism came out of Hinduism. Gautama Buddha was dissatisfied with what he saw. And it was through his teachings eventually that Theravada Buddhism came into as a religion in India and Asia. There's no God. There is a non-theistic ethical system. They do have very strong ethics and morals that are taught as being important. Following those help you get out of the cycle of reincarnation. There is a moral philosophy, and we will find some things in common with Christianity and is teaching on what's right and what's wrong and how to treat people. And there's some of that in Theravada Buddhism. Ultimate goal is nirvana, release from suffering and the cycle of these rebirths and attachments to the world. This is eternal bliss, but it's basically eternal bliss in the sense that you cease to exist and not suffer in this world of suffering anymore. So that's Theravada Buddhism. This one is a modification of Theravada Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism. And there's many, many forms of this. This one is where they elevate Buddha to a godlike status. But again, they have some of the same thing on the reincarnation. But there are easier ways. In Mahayana Buddhists, they provide ways that people can get released from the cycle of samsara, through various aspects depending on the type of Mahayana Buddhism. And there's many types. And they even refer to the fact there could be a heaven and hell. So you're getting to see a little mixing of some Christian perspectives in that. Some would say, well, if you're compassionate to all people, that's one of the best ways to get out of this cycle of reincarnation. So we don't spend any time in this class talking about it, just another variation. But again, notice no spiritual realm. It's all within this physical realm, but it's a mental construct, physical realm. So a very different world religion. The world is an illusion, supreme reality from which the universe emanated. Gautama Buddha deified and regarded as a transitory manifestation of reality. Appeals to the absolute for release from suffering. And enlightenment is attained by compassion for humanity as a possibility as well. All right. That is what we're going to cover in this session. We're going to move next time and compare these worldviews to the Christian worldview. And in doing that, what we basically do is look at the differences. This will tell us when we're dealing with people with different philosophical views, religious views, whatever it may be, is that we can see our Christian worldview, how different it is from their worldview, and it would tell us, the areas we need to do to bridge that gap between our worldviews, and realize that we're talking to people that their perspective things was different than ours in various ways. And we'll discuss that more in the next one. So we'll pick up here next time, and I hope you're doing your coursework well, and please feel free to reach out if you have questions, comments, but also get on the discussion board, introduce yourself. You should have done that early on, but also keep up with your discussions and keep that going. And I will continue to interact online. See you next time.